welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on economic sociology, in today's lecture, we're going to discuss the original affluent society by Marshall Salin. When we try to understand the types of economy, modes of production, one of the common trend in anthropology is to compare the primitive society with advanced capitalist society. And while comparing, most of the time an evolutionary trend is followed in the sense that the primitive society, the hunting gathering society, are always described as having scarcity. They are restricted, limited, or rather they are uneconomic. Now when we look into these terms like restricted, limited, scarcity, they are all implied to the economic man, and Marcel Mauss called this as the economic man as a bourgeois construction. They are not behind, that is, the primitive hunting gathering societies are not behind but before, like the moral man. It is not that the hunters and gatherers have curbed their materialistic impulse, they simply never made an institution of them. That is, the material of plenty was not institutionalized. They were happy as they are far away from all these desires, wants, and most of the time we kind of look into this whole idea that is scarcity a universal problem, and is it that we understand scarcity where we look into the primitive society as a society of scarcity, starvation, limited need, or how do we look at it? What is the leisure? What is scarcity? And in anthropology, it has been done by looking at the comparison between the primitive society who have always been on the lower stage of development, and that is the reason why we need to kind of move away and create a different kind of theorization by understanding these traditional economy, but not by comparing it to the capitalist society, by understanding them in its own context. Now when we look into the idea of scarcity, we see that it is a product of cultural and economic construct found in modern capitalist society, and the primitive economies operated under entirely different principles. To support this argument, Marshall Salin points to the significant leisure time enjoyed by the society, contrasting sharply with the existence of modern day individual. So, there is one set of theory which is saying that the primitive society did not have leisure, there was scarcity, they had limited wants, and therefore, there is the requirement to kind of advance society, and advanced society would kind of move towards a market based society. However, when we look into the theory which is being provided by the anthropologists, the reality is kind of different. Ethnographic evidence from studies of hunting gathering communities shows that these groups often worked fewer hours than contemporary people and still met their needs sufficiently. So, capitalist society we see that we are 24/7 working as machine, yet the production is short, it cannot fulfill our demand. Compared to this, in the earlier primitive society, they were working less hours, yet their wants were satisfied and they were content, they were kind of satisfied. Now, the activities involving foraging and hunting, while inherently linked to the survival, did not consume most of their daily life. Instead, these societies were able to devote substantial time to socializing, recreation, and community activities, suggesting a more balanced way of life. So, there was no sense of accumulation in this society, there was no kind of understanding of material accumulation. Marcel Salin argues that the material needs of hunting gathering society were relatively modest and easily satisfied by the environment. Unlike in modern economies driven by insatiable demands and consumption, the member of these early societies did not seek continuous accumulation of goods. Their lifestyle was marked by a profound understanding of the natural world, allowing them to live sustainably and in harmony with their surroundings. For Salin, the hunting and gathering society have been the first affluent society. This perspective fundamentally challenged the traditional view held by economists and anthropologists that such society lived lives fought with poverty and hardship due to constant scarcity. Now, why is this understanding that the primitive were living in hardship or poverty was the desire of the people in the Western advanced society to increase more production, to show that this their set of lifestyle or their economy is more fruitful in terms of creating a happy life. Now the argument is contrary, and if we kind look around us also, there is this problem of balancing lifestyle, there is this problem of exploitation of natural goods, there is we are being deprived of the nature. So it is actually a U-turn to go back to the primitive simple society where the wants were less, therefore production was less, and therefore there was a sustainable lifestyle. Marshall Salin, in his work Stone Age Economy, suggested that the early societies, rather than struggling perpetually against a scarcity of resources, created systems that enabled them to achieve a state of abundance. The 1948 American Australian scientific expedition to Arnhem Land, published in 1960, found that hunters and gatherers work less and leisure more in the daytime per capita per year than any other conditions of society. So, for two anthropological evidence that Marshall Salin uses in his work are the Arnhem Land and the Bushman, and he is using the two anthropological studies, case studies, to argue that the primitive hunting gathering society were the first affluent society. The key result was a temporal study of hunting and gathering by McCarthy and MacArthur, coupled to MacArthur's analysis of the nutritional outcome. The study summarizes the principal production studies, which were short run, observation taken during non-ceremonial period of two community, and this is the Fish Creek and Hample Bay. The people in both camp were focused on hunting, plant collecting, preparing food and repairing wheat. The Arnhem Land data suggests that the people do not work hard, with an average length of time per person per day spent appropriating and preparing food of 4 or 5 hours. Now, this is an anthropological bias where their lifestyle or the hours that they are spending is being compared to the hours that people spend in an industrial setup. And in industrial setup, it is generally 8 to 10 hours of productivity that we earn, and in comparison to that, then the primitive people were spending less time. They also do not work continuously, with the subsistence quest being highly intermittent. This suggests that hunting and gathering objectives are irregularly achieved, leading to a chaotic work pattern. The characteristics of hunting and gathering in Arnhem Lands are such that these Australians seems to underuse the economic possibilities, resting frequently and not spending all the hours of daylight searching for and preparing food. They also appear to be dissatisfied with an unvarying diet, and some of their time appears to have gone into providing diversity over and above mere sufficiency. This suggests that Arnhem Landers were not physically demanding and did not consider the task of subsistence difficult or tasking as there was no kind of physical labor that was being done, and that is the reason why the economy of the society was termed as subsistence economy. Now, subsistence, just as the other sector of production, there is an economy of specific limited objective. That is the why we call it as subsistence. You are producing only as much as is required for survival. So, in hunting and gathering, these objectives are apt to be irregularly accomplished. So, the work pattern becomes correspondingly erratic. So, since you are only producing as much as you require, there is no desire to increase your production or to kind of work more than is required. A third characteristic of hunting and gathering, not by Westerners, not kind of observed by the Westerner, is that straining to the limits of available labor and disposable resources, these Australians seem to underuse the objective economic possibility. So, the idea is that there was a limited economic objective. Here, when in a capitalist society you are producing surplus, here there is no requirement to put in that extra labor, to put in that extra effort, and therefore it has been described by Western anthropologists as limited, as kind of not showcasing the desire to do more and more physical labor. Fourthly, the economy is not physically. Neither did the Arnhem landers themselves consider the task of subsistence onerous, nor did they approach it as unpleasant job to be got over as soon as possible. Now, because there is no kind of forced labor, you are doing according to your wish, and it is kind of limited. You will produce as much, or you will work only as much as you kind of have a limited want. So, therefore, your approach towards that work will not be negative. You would not be kind of forcefully doing that work. So, the hunting and gathering can afford extraordinary relief from economic cares. The main alternative to work, changing off with it in a complementary way, was sleep. So, again this was kind of captured by the Western anthropologists, that the primitive people just had two things to do, either kind of collect your food stuff, and of you kind of you are sleeping or you are lazy. The failure of Arnhem landers to build culture is not strictly from want of time, it is from idle hands. So, the argument that the Western anthropologists would provide us is that they are idle, they are lazy, and that is the reason that they have not been able to build a culture. However, the anthropological evidence from these societies suggests that they are not building a culture because there is no desire to do it, or there is no necessity looking into their existential reality. Hunting is unpredictable business, with hunters working more frequently than the women, but the schedule is uneven. The Arnhem land and bushmen suggest that the Dobe bushmen do not lead a substandard existence on the edge of starvation. Now, when we have kind of looked into the two sides of the debate, one is how a kind of a certain kind of misconceptions have been created around the hunting and gathering society, and the anthropological ethnographic evidence suggests that it is kind of completely contrary to how they have been defined. They are kind of not necessarily lazy, they have kind of not necessarily starving, there is abundant resource, they have kind of satisfied with their, and therefore what Marcel Salin kind of argues is that there is a need to rethink how hunters and gathering society have been conceptualized in anthropology, and there is kind of a re-evaluation of its true accomplishment and limitation, as it relies on mobility to main production on advantageous terms. So, rather than looking into the society with already certain kind of characteristic, it is important to understand why they are the way they are. Why is that their production is limited? Why is that they kind of do not face the desire to have surplus production? And one of the kind of understanding is to look into the mobility, the movement that is a part of their everyday life, and then try to understand the repercussion on of the movement of this group on their economy. So, the solution is to go somewhere else with higher returns or lower cost, or to stay in a convenient range of camp. Hunting gathering is a practice that reduces food resources in a particular locale, leading to poverty and abundance. So, now that they are on the move, wherever they where the society would camp, after a point of time, obviously the resources would have exhausted. Now, if the anthropologist from the Western context was kind of studying at that point of time, what would they conclude was that it was a society in poverty and abundance. But that was not a correct explanation, because they would not remain there. After some time, they would move to another geographical location. So, culture would negate natural conditions and ecological constraint, leading to dialectics on its relationship to nature. Utility falls quickly at the margin of potability, leading to low productivity of labor. The real handicap of hunting gathering are not obvious, because no study has been done on the society by itself. All have been done in comparison to the industrial society, or rather in kind of the desire to progress, the desire to develop. And in that, no kind of anthropological literature has looked into what is it that it restricted them to go more than what was for a subsistence economy. So, it has a demographic policy of diminishing return at the margin of potability, minimum necessary equipment, elimination of duplicates, infanticides and other kinds of social problem. This policy is an expression of the same ecology as the ascetic economy, and the hunters may be forced to handle people and goods in a parallel way. So, just as we see an ascetic where there is a kind of satisfaction, there is no kind of need to accumulate, or there is no need of kind of move beyond the necessity, it is kind of a parallel with the hunting and gathering society. The Malthusian practice of graphic restraint is a policy to counteract diminishing returns in subsistence. Modern hunters and gatherers pass most of the year in small groups, but this demographic pattern is better understood as the cost of living. So, when we look into the demographic policy, it could also explain why the wants were limited, because the groups were small, there were not too many people. So, whatever was available was sufficient for all the members in that group. Now, when the demography increases, that is the number of people in an individual groups or community is too large, then the available resources becomes restricted, and there comes in the desire to produce more, because it cannot sufficient for everybody, therefore, the production has to be increased. So, as the population of is increasing, it kind of leads to the change in the economic structures. Hunting and gathering society has both strength and weaknesses, and mobility and moderation puts hunters end within range of their technical means, making an underdeveloped mode of production highly effective. Hunters and gatherers of ethnological present suggest a means of 3 to 5 hours per adult workers per day in food production. So, the conclusion is conservatively that hunters and gatherers need not work longer getting food than the primitive cultivators. The Neolithic saw no improvement in the amount of time required per capita for subsistence, but with the advent of agriculture, people had to work hard. So, there is always this going backward and forward. When there is kind of the limited wants and there is no settled agriculture, the agricultural methods are not known to them. So, they were not aware of the fact that they had to work hard. Now, whatever limited resources was available was sufficient for the small group, and they did not know how to do agriculture or how to kind of increase production, and therefore, they were not doing work. So, the explanation that comes in is that they were lazy, which is kind of inappropriate. Hunters' subsistence labor are intermittent, and modern hunters tend to employ their time in activities such as daytime sleep. In tropical habitats, plant collecting is more reliable than hunting itself, and men work is often done. The hunter's unprogressive condition to lack of leisure. So, the whole idea is that why are they more into kind of doing leisurely activity, or they were doing less work, is attributed to the context in which the livelihood was taking place, and the economy was a cycle of extreme activity and total idleness, because the economy was completely dependent on the nature. And if the kind of nature was kind of opposed in terms of that, so if there was kind of flood or there was kind of too much of wind, then the labor would increase. If it was kind of conducive for the individual, then they would be more idle in those times. Hunters and gatherers maintain a sanguine view of the economic state despite the hardship they sometimes know. However, certain hunters have moments of difficulty, such as when they are exposed to the natural disasters, or they are kind of interdicts travel or access to certain kind of adventure. It is difficult to prove that privation is distinctly characteristic of the hunting gatherers, as food shortage is not indicative of this mode of production as opposed to other. Louis, an anthropologist, asks, what of the herders on a simple plain whose maintenance is periodically jeopardized by plague, or the primitive peasant who cultivates and till without compensation of the soil? The most important detail in this text, that is the Stone Age economy, are that 1/3 to 1/2 of humanity are said to go to bed hungry every night, and that the amount of hunger increases relative and absolute with the evolution of culture. So, this is the kind of a dilemma, that if the primitive societies were kind of having scarcity, or there was kind of poverty, then with development, with the coming of market, with advanced technology and capitalist mode of production, the poverty would have gone down. However, the data suggests that those who are hungry, or the hunger rate has kind of increased with development, has increased with these forms, and therefore, the argument that the primitive hunting gathering society were more affluent than the capitalist market based society. And this paradox, the dilemma, is explained by the fact that hunters gatherers had to circumvent the biological law for the material enlargement, and that agriculture allowed Neolithical community of technical advancement. Agriculture not only raised society above the sense, but also allowed the Neolithical community to advance technologically. Technology has been celebrated in many ways, but also expropriating in relation to man. So, the impact of technology is also both in terms of blessing and curse, in the sense that it has helped human beings to meet a lot of needs in limited time, to improve production, but too much of dependence on technology has led to a number of social evils as well. So, the evolution of structure and technology has been an evolution of structures in terms of both within and between society. Poverty is a social status that has grown with civilization, both as an invidious distinction between classes and as a tributary relation that can render agrarian people more susceptible to natural catastrophes. Modern hungers are not representative of the Paleolithic conditions. So, the economic structures have changed, the social structures have changed, but certain of these kind of problems of humanities in terms of poverty, in terms of scarcity, has kind of been increasing. And therefore, in a kind of to give us this argument that the scarcity and poverty was different in the primitive society, Salin gives us the example of the Bushman of Kalahari, and they are not representative of marginal hunters, as the majority of surviving hunter-gatherers live in a life of decapitation and are extremely lazy. The Murugan, for example, have an elaborate and exacting ceremonial life that bestows prestige on craftsmen and trade. Most other hunters have no such concerns and the existence is comparatively dull. So, when we read this work of Marcel Saleh, the conclusion is that ethnography of hunters and gatherers is largely a record of incomplete culture, as rituals and exchange cycles may have disappeared without a trace in the early stages of colonialism. It is not possible to rescue culture from existing hunters and its originality will have to be rethought. So, what he suggests is a re examination of the ways in which the hunting gathering economy and culture has been studied. For reference to this lecture, it is advised to read Marcel Saleh's book, The Original Affluent Society. This is the chapter in the book Stone Age Economy, published in 2013 by Routledge. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.